Tasha could barely hear the customer over the rush of the crowded diner. It was another long shift for her, balancing plates and plastering on a smile that hid her exhaustion. She adjusted her apron, gripping the coffee pot tightly as she headed toward a table in the corner. Her heart stopped. "Excuse me, miss," the older man called, holding out a hand. His smile was kind but unassuming. "May I have another refill?" Tasha nodded and leaned over, but just as she poured, the man placed a crisp check on the table with a note scrawled in black ink. "Look up." She froze mid-pour, her pulse racing. Her eyes darted from the check to the man, and then up toward the television hanging above the counter. It wasn't a sports game or a local news segment. It was a breaking report featuring the same man sitting in front of her, a billionaire, philanthropist, and tech mogul, Alexander Ford. The caption below his photo read, "CEO spotted in small-town diner. Rumored big move ahead." Tasha gasped audibly, nearly spilling the coffee. Why would a billionaire be sitting in her section? More importantly, why was he watching her so closely? She straightened, trying to mask her sudden nerves. "Is everything all right?" he asked with the same gentle tone, his eyes glinting with something she couldn't quite place. Before she could answer, Alexander slid another folded note across the table. Her shaking hands opened it. Inside was one sentence. "You're about to have the most incredible night of your life." Tasha hadn't always worked the late-night shift at Millie's Diner, but bills didn't pay themselves, and dreams didn't keep the lights on. The small town of Redwood Creek had its charm, but opportunities for someone like her, a young black woman who had dropped out of college to care for her younger siblings, were slim. She started her shift like any other day. The smell of sizzling bacon and fried onions greeted her as she walked into the kitchen. Lou, the grumpy cook, muttered about how his spatula was missing again, and Denise, her co-worker, was already knee-deep in customers. "Tasha, table 7 is yours," Denise called out. "Got it," she replied, tying her apron tighter. Her voice was steady, but deep down, she felt that familiar pang of regret. She wanted more than this, more than scraping by on tips and juggling family responsibilities. But how? The diner had been busier than usual, the tables filling up faster than she could clear them. When she reached table 7, the man sitting there immediately caught her attention. He was dressed in a simple navy jacket and jeans, blending in like any other customer, but something about his calm demeanor made him stand out. "What can I get you?" she asked, trying not to stare. "Just coffee for now," he said, his voice even. He didn't look up, instead fiddling with his phone. The faintest smile tugged at his lips. As the night went on, Tasha noticed him watching her. Not in a creepy way, but as if he were observing her every move, assessing something she couldn't understand. She shook it off, chalking it up to her imagination. But then he ordered a meal, pecan pie and scrambled eggs, and lingered long after his plate was clean. Tasha began to wonder why he hadn't left. Her instincts told her he wasn't a threat, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing. It wasn't until her break that she noticed the car. Parked just outside the diner, it was sleek and black, the kind of vehicle no one in Redwood Creek could afford. She caught a glimpse of someone sitting in the driver's seat, but the tinted windows made it impossible to see clearly. "Hey, Denise," Tasha said, leaning against the counter. "You see that car?" Denise glanced outside and shrugged. "Probably just someone passing through. Not like rich folks make a habit of hanging around here." "Yeah, maybe," Tasha mumbled, though her unease grew. When her shift was almost over, Alexander called her back to his table. She noticed his hands weren't just steady, they were deliberate, moving as though he had nothing but time. "Do you ever think about doing something different?" he asked out of nowhere. Tasha blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "Your life," he said, gesturing vaguely. "You're capable of more than this." Her cheeks flushed. "I don't think that's any of your business," she replied, defensive. Who was this guy to judge her? But before she could say more, he pulled out his wallet and placed a $100 bill on the table. "For your honesty," he said, standing. "Keep the change." He didn't wait for her to respond. Instead, he left the diner, leaving Tasha staring after him in confusion. She wanted to brush it off as just another weird interaction, but something told her this was only the beginning. By the time she clocked out, The black car was still there. Tasha hesitated at the door, unsure whether to approach it or avoid it entirely. She was about to walk past when the window rolled down, revealing Alexander in the passenger seat. "Tasha," he called, his voice firm but kind. "Get in. Trust me." Her instinct screamed to say no, to keep walking, but something in his tone made her stop. This was the same man who had tipped her more money than she made in a week and somehow knew her name. Against her better judgment, she opened the door. The interior of the car was like nothing she'd ever seen. Leather seats, glowing panels, and a faint scent of something expensive. She hesitated, but Alexander's calm presence made her slide into the seat. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice shaky. Alexander smiled. "You'll see." As the car pulled away, Tasha's heart raced. Whatever was happening, her life was about to change forever. She just didn't know if it was for better or worse. Tasha gripped the edge of her seat, her breath shallow as the car weaved through the quiet streets of Redwood Creek. She didn't recognize the driver, a stoic man in a dark suit who kept his focus on the road, nor could she fathom why a billionaire had taken such an interest in her. Alexander sat beside her, scrolling through his phone with the same composure he had displayed in the diner. Finally, unable to hold back her curiosity, Tasha broke the silence. "Can you tell me where we're going?" she asked, her voice steady despite her nerves. Alexander turned his head, meeting her gaze. "You'll know soon. I promise you. This isn't a kidnapping or anything sinister." "Comforting," she muttered, folding her arms. He chuckled, a deep, rich sound that momentarily eased her tension. "You've had a tough year," he said. "I saw it in the way you carry yourself. You've got the weight of the world on your shoulders, but you don't let it crush you. That's rare." Tasha blinked, stunned. How could he possibly know that about her? She wanted to argue, to tell him he had no right to assume anything about her life, but the words stuck in her throat. He wasn't wrong. The car slowed as they approached the outskirts of town. Tasha recognized the area. It was where some of the wealthier folks lived, with sprawling estates tucked behind wrought iron gates. The driver pulled up to one such property, a mansion bathed in soft, golden light, surrounded by manicured gardens and a driveway wide enough to park an entire fleet of cars. Tasha stared, her jaw dropping. "This is where you live?" "Not exactly," Alexander said, stepping out of the car. "This is one of my homes. Tonight, it's yours." She froze, her brain struggling to process his words. "Excuse me?" He leaned down, meeting her eyes through the open car door. "Come inside. I'll explain everything." Inside, the mansion was even more stunning. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, and the polished marble floors reflected the light like a mirror. Tasha felt out of place in her scuffed sneakers and diner uniform, but Alexander's calm demeanor somehow made it easier to follow him into the expansive living room. "Why am I here?" she asked, her voice firmer now. "What do you want from me?" Alexander gestured for her to sit on one of the plush couches. "Relax, Tasha. I don't want anything from you. I want to give you something." She frowned, sinking cautiously into the seat. "Why me? You don't even know me." "That's where you're wrong," he said, sitting across from her. "I've been watching you for months." Her stomach dropped. "What?" she hissed, her muscles tensing. "You've been spying on me?" "Not like that," he assured her quickly. "I have an initiative, an anonymous program designed to help people who show resilience and potential, even in the face of adversity. You're one of those people." She shook her head, disbelief etched across her face. "You don't know the first thing about me." "I know enough," Alexander said, his tone soft but unwavering. "You've been working at the diner for 4 years, taking care of your siblings after your mother passed. You gave up your own education to make sure they had a shot at theirs. And somehow, you still find the energy to smile at every customer who walks through the door. That's not just resilience, it's strength." Tasha's throat tightened. She hated how easily his words cut through the walls she had spent years building. "How do you know all that?" "I have resources," he admitted. "I look for people who deserve a chance to change their lives, and you stood out." "So what?" she challenged, crossing her arms. "You're here to play savior?" Alexander smiled faintly. "Not at all. I'm here to offer you an opportunity." What you do with it is entirely up to you. He stood and retrieved a small leather-bound folder from a nearby table, handing it to her. Tasha hesitated before opening it, her fingers trembling slightly. Inside was a contract of sorts, but what caught her attention was the number printed at the bottom. Her breath hitched. $500,000. This is a grant, Alexander explained. No strings attached. It's enough to pay off your debts, go back to school, or start a business, whatever you want. Tasha stared at him, her mind racing. This has to be some kind of joke. It's not, he assured her. Take your time to think it over. If you agree, the money is yours. If not, you can walk away and we'll never cross paths again. Her heart pounded in her chest. The offer was too good to be true. Why would a billionaire give $500,000 to a complete stranger? And what would her siblings think if she told them about this? I don't know, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. This feels overwhelming. I understand, Alexander said. But remember this, Tasha. Opportunities like this don't come often. Sometimes, you have to take a leap of faith. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Alexander showed her around the mansion, explaining that he had created his program after his own struggles growing up in poverty. He wanted to help others achieve the kind of success that had once felt impossible for him. Tasha listened, still grappling with the magnitude of what was happening. She asked him questions, testing his sincerity, but he never wavered. By the time he dropped her off at her small apartment, she was no closer to making a decision. When she walked inside, her younger siblings, Marcus and Alicia, were asleep on the couch, the TV still playing quietly. She turned it off and sat down, the weight of the folder in her lap. For the first time in years, she felt like her life wasn't just stuck on repeat. But as she drifted off to sleep, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. You have 24 hours to decide. The next day at the diner, Tasha tried to act normal, but her mind was elsewhere. She kept replaying Alexander's words in her head, weighing the risks and rewards of accepting his offer. She was so distracted that she didn't notice the man at the counter until he slammed his fist down, startling her. Hey, I've been waiting for 10 minutes, the man barked. I'm sorry, Tasha said quickly, grabbing her notepad. What can I get for you? But before he could answer, the door swung open, and the diner fell silent. Tasha looked up to see Alexander standing there, his expression unreadable. He walked straight to her, ignoring the curious stares of the other customers. Tasha, he said, his voice firm. I need to speak with you. Now. Her stomach churned. What's going on? He didn't answer. Instead, he gestured for her to follow him outside. The other customers whispered among themselves as she hesitated, torn between curiosity and fear. Finally, she stepped out into the cool evening air. Alexander turned to her, his jaw tight. We have a problem. Tasha's heart sank at Alexander's words. What kind of problem? She asked, her voice trembling. Alexander glanced around the quiet street before leaning in, his voice low. You've been noticed. Noticed? By who? He hesitated, his calm demeanor flickering for the first time. The media. Someone recognized me at the diner last night. They've started asking questions. Tasha's chest tightened. What does that have to do with me? They saw us talking, he explained. It's only a matter of time before they dig into your life. If they find anything they can twist into a story, they will. The thought of reporters poking around her life, uncovering her struggles, and broadcasting them for everyone to see made her stomach churn. She stepped back, shaking her head. No, I didn't sign up for this. That's why I came to warn you, Alexander said, his voice firm. You still have time to get ahead of it. Accept the grant, and I'll help protect your privacy. Otherwise, he didn't finish the sentence, but the unspoken consequences hung heavily in the air. Tasha's mind raced. The decision that had seemed overwhelming last night now felt like a ticking time bomb. Why is this happening to me? She muttered, her voice barely audible. Alexander placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Because you're worth it. Don't let fear stop you from changing your life. Tasha didn't go back inside the diner right away. She sat on the curb, staring at the folder Alexander had handed her the night before. Her hands shook as she opened it again, the bold number at the bottom staring back at her like a taunt. $500,000. Enough to pay off her mother's medical bills, fix up the apartment, and send her siblings to college. But at what cost? The idea of reporters prying into her life and turning her family into a spectacle was terrifying. She was still sitting there when Denise came outside, a cigarette dangling from her lips. "What's going on with you?" Denise asked, blowing out a puff of smoke. "You've been acting weird all day." Tasha hesitated. Denise was her closest friend at the diner, but this wasn't the kind of thing she could casually bring up. "It's complicated." Denise raised an eyebrow. "Complicated like the hot guy in the suit who just left? Is he your boyfriend or something?" Tasha snorted, despite herself. "Not even close." "Well, whoever he is, he's got the whole diner talking. You might want to get back in there before Lou blows a gasket." Tasha nodded, standing up and brushing off her apron. "Thanks, Denise." As she walked back inside, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life was spiraling out of control. And the worst part? She hadn't even made a decision yet. That night, Tasha sat in her small kitchen, the folder open in front of her. Marcus and Alicia were arguing over what to watch on TV, their voices blending into background noise. She could hear the faint drip of the leaky faucet, a constant reminder of everything she couldn't afford to fix. Her phone buzzed again. It was another message from the unknown number. "Time is running out." Tasha's hands clenched into fists. Who did Alexander think he was, pressuring her like this? She didn't know him anything, but as much as she wanted to ignore him, she couldn't stop thinking about his words. She looked at her siblings, both of them blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around them. Marcus, just 16, was already talking about skipping college to help with bills. Alicia, only 12, deserved a childhood free from worry. They both did. But without help, Tasha knew their futures would be just as limited as hers. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. She froze, her heart pounding. Visitors were rare at this hour. She stood cautiously and peered through the peephole. It was Alexander. She opened the door, glaring at him. "What are you doing here?" "I couldn't leave things the way they were," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. He glanced around the cramped apartment, his expression softening as he took in the peeling wallpaper and second-hand furniture. "You deserve better than this." "Don't do that," Tasha snapped, crossing her arms. "Don't come into my home and judge me." "I'm not judging," he said gently. "I'm offering a way out." Her frustration boiled over. "Do you have any idea how hard it is to trust someone like you? You waltz into my life with your money and your promises, but you don't know what it's like to live like this. You don't know what it's like to be me." Alexander's expression hardened, but his voice remained calm. "You're right. I don't. But I know what it's like to feel trapped. To feel like no matter how hard you work, you'll never get ahead. That's why I'm doing this. Not just for you, but for everyone like you." His words hit her like a punch to the gut. For a moment, the anger drained out of her, replaced by a deep, aching sadness. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that someone like him could genuinely care about someone like her. "Why me?" she asked quietly. "Out of all the people in the world, why did you choose me?" "Because you're strong," Alexander said. "And because I see a part of myself in you." Tasha looked away, her eyes stinging. She hated crying in front of people, but the weight of everything, her struggles, her doubts, her hopes, was too much to bear. Alexander stepped closer, his voice soft. "You don't have to decide tonight. But whatever you choose, know this: you're not alone." Later that night, after Alexander left, Tasha sat in the dark, staring at the folder on the table. She thought about her mother, who had always told her to dream big, even when life seemed impossible. She thought about Marcus and Alicia, who deserved every opportunity she never had. And she thought about Alexander, with his calm voice and piercing eyes, offering her a lifeline she wasn't sure she deserved. Her phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't a message. It was a news alert. She opened it, her heart sinking as she read the headline. "Billionaire Alexander Ford spotted in Redwood Creek. Mystery woman identified." The article included a blurry photo of her and Alexander outside the diner. Her name wasn't mentioned yet, but it was only a matter of time. Tasha's hands trembled as she closed the app. The media storm Alexander had warned her about was coming, whether she was ready or not. And for the first time, she realized there was no turning back. The next morning, Tasha woke up to the sound of her phone buzzing relentlessly. Groggy and disoriented, she reached for it on her bedside table. The screen was flooded with notifications, missed calls, text messages, and social media alerts. Her heart sank as she opened the first one. "Is this you?" read a text from Denise, accompanied by a screenshot of a news article. Tasha sat up, her pulse racing. She clicked the link, and there it was. Small-town waitress at center of Billionaire's secret project. Below the headline was the same blurry photo of her and Alexander outside the diner. This time, her name was front and center. Tasha Hill, a waitress at Millie's Diner, has reportedly caught the attention of tech mogul Alexander Ford. Sources say the billionaire has been seen meeting with Hill multiple times, sparking speculation about his motives. Her stomach twisted. The article went on to speculate about everything from a romantic relationship to a business deal. It even mentioned her siblings and the financial struggles she'd worked so hard to keep private. "Tasha, what's going on?" Marcus called from the living room, his voice laced with confusion. "You're on TV." She scrambled out of bed, her heart pounding as she rushed to the living room. On the screen, a news anchor was discussing her life as if it were some kind of soap opera. Photos of the diner, her apartment building, and even her high school graduation flashed on the screen. Alexander Ford has been known for his philanthropic efforts, but this latest endeavor has raised eyebrows, the anchor said. "Why Redwood Creek? And why Tasha Hill?" Tasha turned off the TV, her hands shaking. Marcus and Alicia stared at her, their faces a mix of curiosity and concern. "What's going on?" Marcus asked. "Why is everyone talking about you and some rich guy?" "It's complicated," Tasha mumbled, sinking onto the couch. "Are we in trouble?" Alicia asked, her wide eyes brimming with worry. Tasha forced a smile, though her chest felt like it was caving in. "No, we're not in trouble. I'll handle it." But as she stared at the pile of unopened messages on her phone, she wasn't sure how. Later that day, Tasha decided to call Alexander. He answered on the first ring. "I saw the news," she said, skipping the pleasantries. "It's worse than I expected." "I know," Alexander replied, his voice steady. "I've already spoken to my legal team. We'll handle the press." "What does that even mean?" she asked, frustration creeping into her voice. "They've plastered my name and face everywhere. My siblings are scared. My whole life is on display, and it's your fault." There was a long pause before Alexander spoke again. "You're right. I didn't anticipate this level of scrutiny, and for that, I'm sorry. But we can fix this. Let me help you." Tasha sighed, her anger softening into exhaustion. "How?" "First, we need to get you out of town," Alexander said. "The reporters will be at the diner soon, and I don't want them harassing you or your family." "Leave town?" she repeated, her voice rising. "I can't just pack up and go. I've already arranged a safe place for you to stay," he said. "It's temporary, but it'll give us time to deal with the media and figure out your next steps." Tasha hesitated. The idea of leaving everything behind felt impossible, but so did staying and facing the onslaught of attention. "What about Marcus and Alicia?" she asked. "I can't leave them." "They'll come with you," Alexander assured her. "I'll make sure they're comfortable and safe." She bit her lip, weighing her options. Trusting Alexander felt risky, but at this point, what choice did she have? "Fine," she said finally. "But this better not blow up in my face." By evening, a black SUV was parked outside Tasha's apartment. Alexander had sent a driver to pick them up, and Marcus and Alicia were surprisingly quiet as they packed their belongings. "Where are we even going?" Marcus asked as they loaded their bags into the car. "Somewhere safe," Tasha said, though she wasn't entirely sure herself. The drive was long and silent, the tension in the car palpable. Eventually, they arrived at a gated property on the outskirts of the next town. The house was smaller than Alexander's mansion, but still far nicer than anything Tasha had ever lived in. It was modern and sleek, with large windows and a sprawling backyard. "This is temporary?" Marcus asked, his voice dripping with disbelief. "Yes," Tasha said, though she was just as stunned. Don't get too comfortable. Inside, they found everything they could possibly need: food, clothes, and even a fully stocked entertainment room for the kids. Tasha was grateful, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this was all too much, too fast. The next morning, Tasha received a call from Alexander. "How are you settling in?" he asked. "It's nice," she admitted, "but this doesn't feel real." "I understand," he said, "but we need to focus on the next step. The media storm isn't going to die down anytime soon, so I want to give you a chance to tell your side of the story." "My side?" Tasha asked, frowning. "I don't even know what the story is." "You're a hard-working woman who's had to overcome incredible challenges," Alexander said. "People need to hear that. It'll help shift the narrative and take control of the situation." Tasha wasn't sure she liked the idea of being the center of attention, but she couldn't deny that Alexander had a point. If she stayed silent, the media would fill in the blanks with whatever they wanted. "All right," she said reluctantly. "What do I need to do?" "I'll set up an interview," Alexander said, "with someone I trust. Just be yourself and everything will work out." Tasha wasn't convinced, but at this point, she didn't have much of a choice. 2 days later, Tasha found herself sitting across from a well-known journalist in a brightly lit studio. The cameras and microphones made her nervous, but she reminded herself to stay calm. Alexander had coached her beforehand, but this was still uncharted territory. The interview started with soft questions about her upbringing and her job at the diner. Tasha answered cautiously, careful not to reveal too much. But as the journalist dug deeper, the questions became more pointed. "What do you say to critics who believe Alexander Ford is using you for publicity?" the journalist asked. Tasha stiffened, her mind racing. She glanced at Alexander, who was watching from behind the camera, his expression unreadable. "I think people are quick to judge when they don't know the whole story," she said carefully. "Alexander's been nothing but kind and generous to me. This isn't about publicity. It's about giving someone a chance." The journalist nodded, scribbling notes. "And what do you plan to do with this chance?" Tasha hesitated. She hadn't fully decided yet, but she knew she couldn't let this opportunity slip through her fingers. "I want to build a better future," she said firmly, "for myself and my family." The interview wrapped up shortly after, and Tasha felt a mixture of relief and anxiety as the cameras turned off. Alexander approached her, his expression softening. "You did great," he said. But before she could respond, a loud commotion erupted outside the studio. Voices were shouting, and security guards rushed toward the entrance. Tasha's stomach dropped. "What's happening?" she asked. Alexander's face darkened. "Stay here," he said, heading toward the noise. Tasha's heart pounded as she watched him disappear into the chaos. Moments later, a security guard ran into the room, his face pale. "We've got a problem," he said. "Someone leaked your location." Tasha felt a chill run down her spine as the guard's words sank in. Her location had been leaked. The media circus she had feared was no longer a distant threat. It was right outside the studio. "What do you mean? Leaked?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Who leaked it?" The guard shook his head, looking uneasy. "We don't know yet, but there's a mob of reporters outside. Some of them are getting aggressive." Tasha's chest tightened as panic set in. "Where's Alexander?" "He said he was handling this." "He's trying to de-escalate," the guard said, motioning for her to follow him. "But we need to get you out of here now." Before Tasha could protest, the door burst open, and Alexander strode in, his face grim. "Tasha, we have to move," he said, his calm exterior cracking for the first time. "What's going on out there?" she demanded, her voice rising. "Why can't they just leave me alone?" "Because this is how the media works," Alexander said, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "The more you resist, the harder they push. But I promise you, I'll get you through this." The guard gestured urgently toward the back exit. "We have a car waiting. It's the safest way out." Alexander nodded and turned to Tasha. "Trust me, all right? We're going to fix this." Tasha didn't have the energy to argue. She let him guide her through the narrow corridors of the studio, her heart racing with every step. The sound of shouting grew louder as they approached the exit. Cameras flashed through the glass doors, and she could see reporters jostling for position, their voices overlapping in a chaotic frenzy. The guard opened the back door, revealing a sleek black SUV idling in the alley. Alexander ushered her inside, sliding in beside her before the driver hit the gas. The vehicle sped away, but Tasha could still see the mob of reporters in the rearview mirror, some of them running after the car. She sank back into her seat, her hands trembling. "This is insane," she muttered. "How did my life turn into this?" Alexander sighed, rubbing his temples. "Someone tipped them off, but we'll find out who. In the meantime, I'm moving you to a more secure location." "What about Marcus and Alicia?" Tasha asked, her voice tight. "Are they safe?" "They're fine," Alexander assured her. "I've already sent a team to the house. They'll make sure your siblings are protected." Tasha nodded, though her nerves refused to settle. She stared out the window, watching the city blur past as they drove toward yet another unknown destination. The SUV eventually pulled into a private driveway, hidden behind a tall hedge. The house was smaller than the last one, but still far more luxurious than anything Tasha had ever known. It felt strange to keep moving from place to place, as though her life had become one long game of hide and seek. Inside, Alexander led her to a spacious living room with floor-to-ceiling windows. He gestured for her to sit, but she remained standing, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "All right," she said, her voice firm. "No more secrets. What aren't you telling me?" Alexander hesitated, his jaw tightening. "There's been some backlash." "Backlash?" she repeated, her stomach sinking. "What kind of backlash?" He ran a hand through his hair, a rare sign of frustration. "There are people who don't like what I'm doing. They think helping you is a waste of resources, or that I have ulterior motives." "Like what?" she demanded. "What could they possibly think you're getting out of this?" Alexander met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Power, control, publicity, you name it. Some people can't accept the idea of generosity without strings attached." Tasha let out a bitter laugh. "And now I'm the one paying for it." "You're not alone in this," Alexander said firmly. "I'm going to protect you, no matter what it takes." The next few days were a blur of tension and uncertainty. Tasha stayed in the new house, avoiding the outside world as much as possible. Alexander visited often, checking in on her and reassuring her that his team was handling the media frenzy. But despite his promises, the headlines kept coming. Every time Tasha glanced at her phone, there was a new article dissecting her life or questioning her relationship with Alexander. Her name trended on social media, and strangers filled her inbox with messages, some supportive, others cruel. "Why won't they leave me alone?" she asked Alexander one evening, her voice heavy with frustration. "Because you're a story," he said simply. "And stories sell." "I didn't ask to be a story," she snapped. "I know," he said gently, "but we can't change that now. What we can do is control the narrative." Tasha frowned. "How?" "By showing them who you really are," Alexander said. "The more they see your strength and resilience, the harder it'll be for them to tear you down." She wanted to believe him, but the weight of the situation felt suffocating. For the first time, she wondered if accepting his help had been a mistake. One night, as Tasha was settling into bed, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She hesitated before opening it, her stomach twisting in anticipation. "You should have stayed in your lane." Her blood ran cold. She stared at the message, her hands trembling. Who would send something like this? Was it just a troll, or was it something more serious? She called Alexander immediately, her voice shaking as she told him about the message. "Stay where you are," he said, his tone sharper than she'd ever heard it. "I'm sending security over right now." Tasha hung up, her heart pounding. She double-checked that all the doors and windows were locked, but the unease wouldn't go away. Every shadow seemed to move, every creak of the house made her jump. An hour later, Alexander arrived with 2 security guards in tow. He looked more serious than ever as he inspected the house, his eyes scanning every corner. "You're not safe here," he said finally. "We need to move you again." Tasha stared at him, her frustration bubbling over. "Move again? Where?" "I'm tired of running, Alexander. I just want my life back." "I know," he said softly, But until we figure out who's behind this, we have to be cautious. And what if you never figure it out? She asked, her voice breaking. What if this never ends? Alexander didn't answer. His silence was more terrifying than anything he could have said. The next move felt different from the others. Alexander's demeanor had shifted from calm reassurance to controlled urgency, and the security guards he brought with him weren't just there to escort Tasha. They were clearly on high alert. Their presence alone made her feel like a target. As they left the house, Alexander walked beside her, his hand lightly touching her back. "Trust me," he said, his voice low but firm. "We're going somewhere they can't find you." The convoy of black SUVs drove deep into the countryside, far away from city lights and prying eyes. The roads became narrower, bordered by thick forests, until they reached a secluded property surrounded by tall fences and state-of-the-art security cameras. It wasn't just a house, it was a fortress. Inside, the tension didn't ease. The guards checked every room before letting her settle in. Alexander, meanwhile, was on the phone, his voice sharp as he gave instructions to someone on the other end. Tasha couldn't take it anymore. She cornered him in the kitchen, her frustration boiling over. "You need to tell me what's really going on," she demanded. "I'm not stupid, Alexander. This is more than just bad press." He sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "You're right. There's more to it." "Then start talking," she snapped. "Because I'm done being kept in the dark." Alexander leaned against the counter, his usually composed face lined with stress. "The message you received wasn't just a random threat," he admitted. "It came from someone I know. Someone who doesn't want me helping you." Tasha's stomach turned. "What? Why?" "There are people in my world who benefit from keeping things the way they are," he explained. "Helping someone like you, someone who doesn't fit their idea of worthy, threatens their power. They don't like that." Her jaw tightened. "So this is about racism?" "In part," Alexander said. "But it's also about control. They see what I'm doing as a challenge to their authority, and they're willing to do whatever it takes to stop me." Tasha felt a mix of anger and disbelief. "You're telling me that because you decided to help me, powerful people are coming after us? That's insane." "It's the reality of the world I live in," he said. "But I won't let them win. I've dealt with this kind of pressure before." "Well, I haven't," she shot back. "I didn't sign up for this." Alexander's expression softened. "I know, and I hate that you're caught in the middle of it. But I promise you, I'll protect you. I just need you to trust me." Tasha wanted to believe him, but the weight of his words was crushing. She felt like a pawn in a game she didn't understand, and the stakes were higher than she ever could have imagined. The next morning, Tasha woke up to find the house eerily quiet. Alexander had left early for a meeting, and the security guards were stationed outside, their presence both reassuring and unsettling. She wandered into the kitchen, her thoughts swirling. Every time she tried to imagine a way out of this mess, she hit a dead end. Even if she walked away from Alexander and his offer, the media frenzy and the threats wouldn't magically disappear. Her phone buzzed on the counter, breaking her train of thought. She hesitated before picking it up, half expecting another ominous message. But it was Denise. "Hey, are you okay? I saw some crazy stuff on the news." "Call me." Tasha sighed, debating whether to respond. She hadn't told Denise much about what was going on, but she missed the comfort of a familiar voice. She dialed the number and waited. "Tasha!" Denise exclaimed as soon as she answered. "Girl, what the hell is going on? They've got your face all over the news." "It's complicated," Tasha said, the same word she'd used too many times already. "Well, people are talking," Denise said. "Some think it's amazing what that guy is doing for you. Others, not so much." "What do you mean?" Tasha asked, her stomach tightening. "There's this rumor going around that you're scamming him," Denise said hesitantly, "that you manipulated him into giving you all that money." Tasha felt like the air had been knocked out of her lungs. "That's not true." "I know," Denise said quickly, "but people love to tear others down. You've got to be careful." "Yeah," Tasha muttered, her throat tight. "Thanks for letting me know." After hanging up, she stared at her phone, the weight of everything pressing down on her. No matter what she did, it seemed like the world was determined to paint her as the villain. That night, Alexander returned, his face grim. He sat down across from Tasha at the dining table, his usual composure replaced with something darker. "They've escalated," he said. "Who?" Tasha asked, though she already knew the answer. "The people behind the threats," he said. "They've started digging into your past. They've found your family's financial records, your school history, anything they can use against you." Tasha's hands clenched into fists. "Why would they do that? What do they want?" "They want to discredit you," Alexander said. "If they can make you look like a fraud, it undermines everything I'm trying to do." Tasha felt a surge of anger. "So I'm just collateral damage in your fight?" "No," he said firmly. "You're the reason I'm fighting. This isn't just about you. It's about everyone who's ever been overlooked or underestimated. You're their symbol, Tasha. That's why they're so determined to tear you down." She stared at him, her emotions a whirlwind of fear, anger, and confusion. "What do we do?" "We fight back," Alexander said. "But it's going to get worse before it gets better." As if on cue, the next day brought another shock. While Alexander was on a call, Tasha turned on the TV to catch the news. Her heart stopped when she saw the headline. "Exclusive. Alleged secrets from Tasha Hill's past." The segment played footage of her old apartment, her siblings, and even her late mother's medical bills. The anchor's tone was laced with insinuation, as though Tasha had something to hide. Her blood boiled as she watched them dissect her life, twisting the truth into something unrecognizable. She turned off the TV and stormed into the next room, where Alexander was finishing his call. "They're dragging my family into this," she shouted. "This isn't just about me anymore. They're attacking the people I care about." "I know," Alexander said, his voice calm but his expression stormy. "And I promise you, we'll make them pay for it." "How?" she demanded. "You keep saying that, but nothing's changing." "It will," he said. "But first, we need to find out who's behind this." Before Tasha could respond, one of the security guards burst into the room, his face pale. "Sir, there's been a breach." "A breach?" Alexander repeated, his voice cold. "What kind of breach?" The guard hesitated. "Someone got past the outer perimeter. We don't know who yet, but they're on the property." Tasha's heart stopped. "What do you mean they're here?" Alexander turned to her, his jaw tight. "Stay with me. No one's getting to you." But as the guards scrambled to lock down the house, Tasha couldn't shake the feeling that everything was spiraling out of control, and this time, there might be no way out. Tasha's heart pounded as the guards' words echoed in her ears. Someone got past the outer perimeter. The secure house, which had felt like a refuge moments ago, now seemed like a trap. "Stay with me," Alexander repeated, his voice steady but his eyes sharp. He turned to the head of security. "Get a visual and lock this place down." "Yes, sir," the guard said, speaking urgently into his radio as he disappeared into the hall. Tasha stood frozen in place, her thoughts racing. "What if they get in?" she whispered. "They won't," Alexander said, his tone firm. He placed a hand on her shoulder, steadying her. "You're safe with me." But was she? The security breach made everything feel fragile. Tasha couldn't shake the growing sense of unease, the feeling that no matter where she went, the chaos would follow. The next few minutes felt like hours. The house was eerily quiet, apart from the muffled voices of the security team communicating over their radios. Tasha sat on the couch, her legs bouncing nervously, while Alexander paced nearby, his phone pressed to his ear. Finally, one of the guards returned, his expression grim. "We found footprints leading to the garden, but whoever it was is gone now." "They didn't make it inside." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Do we know who it was?" "No," the guard admitted. "But they left something behind." He held out a small envelope, sealed with a red wax stamp. Alexander took it, his face unreadable as he turned it over in his hands. Tasha stood, her curiosity and fear battling for dominance. "What is it?" she asked. Alexander broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. His eyes scanned the page, his expression darkening with every word. Without a word, he handed it to Tasha. The note was handwritten in precise, slanted script. "We warned you. Walk away now, or we'll make sure you regret it." This is your last chance. Tasha's hands shook as she read the words. They're threatening you, she said, looking up at Alexander. They're threatening us, he corrected, his voice low. They want me to abandon this fight, and they're using you as leverage. Her stomach churned. What do we do now? Alexander folded the letter carefully, his movements deliberate. We don't back down. The hours that followed were tense. Security was tightened even further, with guards patrolling the property and monitoring the surrounding area. Tasha tried to distract herself by scrolling through her phone, but the endless stream of news articles and hateful comments only added to her anxiety. She couldn't stop replaying the events in her mind. The breach, the note, the unknown threat lurking just outside their walls. She felt like a prisoner in her own life, trapped by circumstances beyond her control. Later that evening, Alexander joined her in the living room, holding 2 mugs of tea. He handed one to her and sat down, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert. You should try to get some rest, he said. Tasha snorted. Rest? Are you serious? Someone just broke into the property and left a death threat, and you think I'm supposed to sleep? I know it's hard, he said, his tone gentle, but letting fear consume you won't help. She stared into her mug, her frustration bubbling over. Why me, Alexander? Out of all the people you could have helped, why did you pick me? I told you, he said, leaning forward. Because you deserve it. Because you have the strength to handle this. She shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm barely holding on. Alexander reached out, covering her hand with his. That's what strength is, Tasha. Holding on even when everything feels impossible. As the night wore on, the house grew quieter. Tasha eventually retreated to her room, though sleep felt like an impossible task. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind a chaotic mess of fears and questions. At some point, she must have drifted off, because she was jolted awake by a loud noise. Her heart raced as she sat up, straining to hear. It sounded like something, or someone, was moving outside her window. She crept to the window, her hands trembling as she parted the curtains. The moonlight illuminated the garden below, where 2 figures were moving in the shadows. One of them carried a flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. Tasha's breath caught in her throat. They weren't security guards. She backed away from the window, her mind screaming at her to run. She grabbed her phone and dialed Alexander, her fingers shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. Alexander, she whispered urgently when he answered. There are people in the garden. They're not security. Stay in your room, he said, his voice calm but commanding. Lock the door and don't move. I'm on my way. Tasha did as he said, her hands fumbling with the lock as her heart pounded in her chest. She pressed her back against the door, her ears straining for any sound. Footsteps, voices, anything. A sudden knock at the door made her jump. Tasha, it's me, Alexander said from the other side. She unlocked the door, her relief short-lived as she saw the tension in his face. What's happening? She asked, her voice trembling. Someone got past the guards, he said, but we're handling it. I need you to stay with me. He led her downstairs, where the security team was gathered, their expressions grim. One of the guards approached Alexander, speaking in hushed tones. Tasha couldn't make out the words, but whatever he said made Alexander's face harden. What is it? She asked, her anxiety spiking. They're still on the property, Alexander said, turning to her. And they're looking for you. The room fell silent. Tasha's stomach churned as Alexander's words echoed in her mind. They're looking for you. For me, she whispered. Why? Alexander's face was calm, but his eyes were sharp with urgency. Because you're the key to what they want. You've become a symbol of everything they're trying to stop. Before she could process his answer, a commotion erupted outside. Voices shouted, and a loud thud reverberated through the house. The guards sprang into action, some heading toward the source of the noise, while others formed a protective circle around Tasha and Alexander. Get her out of here, Alexander ordered the head of security. Now. No, Tasha protested. I'm not leaving you here. Alexander's voice softened, though his urgency remained. Tasha, trust me. I'll be fine. But I need you to stay safe. The guards began moving her toward a hidden door in the far corner of the room. It blended seamlessly with the wall, and when one of them pressed a button, it slid open to reveal a narrow staircase leading downward. Where does this go? Tasha asked, her voice shaky. It's a safe room, the guard explained. You'll be secure there. Tasha hesitated, glancing back at Alexander. He gave her a reassuring nod, and despite her fear, she allowed the guards to lead her down the stairs. The safe room was stark and utilitarian, with reinforced steel walls and a small monitor displaying security camera feeds. Tasha watched the screens, her heart pounding as figures moved through the garden and around the house. The intruders were dressed in dark clothing, their faces obscured by masks. Who are they? She asked the guard standing beside her. We don't know yet, he replied, his voice clipped. But they're organized. This isn't just a random break-in. On the monitor, Tasha saw Alexander standing near the front entrance, his posture calm and composed. Several guards flanked him, their weapons drawn. She wanted to scream at him to get somewhere safe, but the screen was just a cold, silent barrier between them. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Tasha's mind raced with worst-case scenarios. What if Alexander got hurt? What if the intruders found their way to her? The weight of it all felt suffocating. Suddenly, one of the cameras showed an intruder entering the house through a broken window. Tasha gasped, her nails digging into the armrest of the chair she was sitting in. The figure moved swiftly, heading down a hallway she recognized as leading toward the stairs. They're coming this way, she said, her voice shaking. The guard beside her nodded and pressed a button on the console. Team 2, we have movement in the south wing. Intercept immediately. The feed cut out as the intruder reached the hallway. Tasha clenched her fists, her imagination filling in the blanks with terrifying possibilities. Above ground, Alexander stood firm as the security team coordinated their efforts. He'd been in high-stakes situations before, but this was different. This wasn't about protecting a company or negotiating a deal. This was about keeping Tasha safe. And that made it personal. Status? He asked the head of security. We've intercepted one of them, the man replied. 2 others are still unaccounted for, but we're closing in. Alexander nodded, his jaw tight. I want them subdued, not killed. We need answers. Yes, sir, the guard said before stepping away to relay the orders. Alexander's phone buzzed, and he glanced at the screen. It was a message from an unknown number. You can't save her. Walk away, or she'll pay the price. His grip on the phone tightened. Whoever was behind this wasn't just trying to scare him. They were escalating. He looked toward the hidden door that led to the safe room. Tasha was down there, and she trusted him to keep her safe. He wasn't about to let her down. Back in the safe room, Tasha's anxiety spiked as the minutes dragged on. The guard beside her kept his expression neutral, but his hand rested on his weapon, ready to act at a moment's notice. What happens if they find us? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. They won't, the guard said firmly. This room is impenetrable. Despite his assurance, Tasha couldn't shake the feeling of being hunted. The air felt heavy, and every sound seemed amplified. She kept her eyes glued to the monitors, her heart sinking as she noticed one of the intruders heading directly toward the safe room entrance. There, she said, pointing at the screen. They're right outside. The guard moved quickly, positioning himself between Tasha and the door. He pressed a button on his radio. We have a breach at the safe room. Need backup immediately. Tasha's breath came in shallow gasps as she watched the figure on the screen. The intruder stopped in front of the hidden door, as if searching for a way in. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the sound of metal striking metal echoed through the room. The intruder was trying to force the door open. Stay behind me, the guard ordered, drawing his weapon. Tasha backed up, her body trembling. The door rattled under the force of the blows, but it held firm. She silently prayed it would continue to hold. Backup is on the way, the guard said, his voice steady. Just stay calm. But Tasha wasn't calm. The reality of the situation pressed down on her like a weight, and for the first time, she wondered if this would ever truly end. Suddenly, the sound of gunfire erupted through the monitors. Tasha flinched, her eyes darting between the screens. The camera feed outside the safe room showed Alexander and a team of guards engaging the remaining intruders. The fight was chaotic, with shadows and flashes of light dancing across the screen. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the screen showed the guards apprehending the intruders. 2 were pinned to the ground, their weapons confiscated. A third lay unconscious near the garden. "It's over," the guard in the safe room said, lowering his weapon. "You're safe." But Tasha didn't feel safe. As she watched Alexander on the screen, speaking to the guards and surveying the damage, a new realization hit her. Whoever was behind this wasn't going to stop. She wasn't just caught in the crossfire. She was the target. And until they figured out who was pulling the strings, she would never be free. Tasha emerged from the safe room into a house that no longer felt like a haven. Broken glass littered the floor where a window had been smashed, and scuff marks streaked the walls from the intruder's struggle with the security team. She kept close to Alexander, her steps hesitant as her eyes darted around, half expecting someone to jump out of the shadows. "You're safe now," Alexander said, his voice firm but soothing. He gestured to a security guard. "Make sure she gets something to eat and some rest." Tasha shook her head. "No, I'm not going anywhere until I know what's going on," Alexander sighed, his expression a mix of exhaustion and determination. "Tasha, you've been through enough for one night. Let me handle this." Her jaw tightened. "I don't want you to handle it. I want to know the truth. Who are these people, and why won't they leave me alone?" Alexander hesitated, glancing at the guards nearby before gesturing for her to follow him to the study. Once inside, he shut the door and leaned against the desk, his face more serious than she'd ever seen. "There's something I didn't tell you," he began. "The people behind this? They aren't just angry about me helping you. They're part of a group, a powerful network that thrives on control. They see what I'm doing as a threat to their power." Tasha frowned. "A network? Like some kind of secret organization?" "Something like that," he admitted. "They operate behind the scenes, influencing politics, business, and media. They've been watching me for years, waiting for a reason to come after me. Helping you gave them that reason." Her heart sank. "So this is my fault?" "No," Alexander said firmly. "This is their fault. They've been looking for an excuse to tear me down, and they think targeting you is the way to do it." Tasha rubbed her temples, the weight of his words pressing down on her. "What do they even want from me?" "To scare you," he said. "To make you doubt yourself, doubt me, and back out of this entirely. If they can get you to walk away, they think they've won." She stared at him, her anger simmering beneath the surface. "So what are we supposed to do? Just sit here and wait for them to come back?" "No," Alexander said, his voice steely. "We fight back. We expose them for who they really are." Over the next few days, Alexander worked tirelessly to unravel the network behind the attacks. His team of investigators dug through financial records, intercepted communications, and pieced together a web of connections that painted a chilling picture. The group wasn't just powerful, they were untouchable. Tasha spent most of her time in the house, avoiding the outside world and trying to process everything that had happened. She couldn't shake the fear that another attack was just around the corner. Every shadow felt like a threat, every noise like a warning. But as the days turned into nights, something inside her began to shift. She was tired of being afraid, tired of hiding. If Alexander was willing to stand up to these people, then so was she. One evening, Alexander called her into the study, where a large map of connections and photographs covered the wall. He pointed to a name circled in red ink, David Hensley. "He's the one pulling the strings," Alexander said. "A billionaire investor with ties to every major industry. He's been funding this network for years, using his money and influence to keep people like us in check." Tasha stared at the name, anger bubbling up inside her. "So what's the plan?" "We've found evidence tying him to the attacks," Alexander said. "Emails, payments, even surveillance footage of him meeting with the people who broke in here. But exposing him won't be easy. He's got lawyers, politicians, and media outlets in his pocket." Tasha crossed her arms. "Then we go public." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "Go public? You do realize the kind of backlash you'll face?" "I don't care," she said. "They've already dragged my name through the mud. If speaking out helps bring these people down, Then I'll do it. Alexander studied her for a moment before nodding. All right, but we'll do this carefully. No interviews, no press conferences, not yet. We'll release the evidence anonymously and let it speak for itself. That night, Alexander's team prepared a secure channel to release the evidence. Tasha watched as they uploaded files, her nerves on edge. Each document, each photo, each email was a piece of the puzzle that could take down David Hensley and his network. As the final file uploaded, Alexander turned to her. Once this goes live, there's no turning back. Are you ready for this? Tasha nodded, her resolve firm. I'm ready. The files went live, accompanied by a detailed report exposing the network's operations. Within hours, the story spread like wildfire. News outlets picked it up, social media buzzed with outrage, and hashtags like #expose_Hensley began trending. But the victory was short-lived. The next morning, Tasha woke to the sound of Alexander arguing with one of his security guards. She crept downstairs, her heart sinking as she overheard their conversation. They've countered with a lawsuit, the guard said. Defamation, libel, invasion of privacy, you name it. Hensley's throwing everything he has at you. Alexander's jaw tightened. Of course he is. That's what bullies do when they're cornered. Tasha stepped into the room. What does this mean for us? It means we're in for a fight, Alexander said. Hensley's trying to discredit the evidence, claiming it's fake, and his legal team is one of the best in the country. So what do we do? She asked, her stomach churning. We keep going, Alexander said. The truth is on our side, and the public is already turning against him. He's losing control, and he knows it. Tasha nodded, but her confidence wavered. Hensley was clearly desperate, and desperate people were dangerous. She couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. That night, as Tasha tried to fall asleep, her phone buzzed with a new message. She hesitated before opening it, dreading what she might find. The message was brief, but it sent a chill down her spine. You should have stayed quiet. Now it's too late. Tasha sat up in bed, her heart racing. She knew this wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. And whatever was coming next would test her strength in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The days that followed the message were a blur of escalating threats, press conferences, and legal battles. Tasha felt like she was caught in the eye of a storm, watching as everything she had feared slowly came to life. The lawsuit Hensley filed was just the beginning. The media campaigns against her were relentless. They painted her as a pawn in a billionaire's game, a woman looking for fame and fortune. It wasn't just her reputation on the line anymore, it was her future. But Tasha refused to back down. With Alexander by her side, they fought back with everything they had. They presented undeniable evidence, backed up by experts, and called out the corruption that Hensley's network had worked so hard to conceal. The public started to turn. Social media flooded with support for Tasha, and the #expose_Hensley gained traction. People were demanding accountability. Hensley, cornered and running out of options, tried to save face with public apologies and strategic donations to charity, but it wasn't enough. The more his empire crumbled, the more desperate he became. He hired private investigators, sent threatening messages, and even made attempts to silence Tasha's supporters. But no matter what he did, the truth had already found its way into the light. One morning, as Tasha sat in the kitchen with Alexander, sipping coffee and reading the latest news, the phone rang. Alexander picked it up, his expression unreadable as he listened. After a long pause, he placed the receiver down slowly. Tasha looked up, her heart skipping a beat. It's over, Alexander said, his voice barely above a whisper. What do you mean? She asked, her voice trembling. Hensley's been arrested. They've got him on charges of fraud, corruption, and conspiracy. The media's already running the story. Tasha stared at him, unable to process the words. She had spent months in fear, constantly looking over her shoulder, terrified that one mistake would cost her everything. But now, it was finally over. The silence in the room felt heavy, but it wasn't oppressive. It was a relief. Tasha had one. She had faced her darkest fears and come out on the other side stronger than ever. She had stood up for herself, for the people she loved, and for the truth. As the days passed, Tasha began to rebuild her life. She spoke at rallies, shared her story, and became a voice for those who had been silenced by the powerful forces she had fought against. The settlement from the case allowed her to pay off her debts, finish her education, and set up a foundation dedicated to helping others who had been targeted by corrupt systems. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, Tasha felt like she had control over her own future. She wasn't just the waitress caught in a billionaire's game anymore. She was a survivor, a fighter, and a force to be reckoned with. As she stood on the steps of a new home she had bought for herself and her siblings, Tasha couldn't help but smile. The world may have tried to break her, but in the end, it had made her stronger. And now, she was ready for whatever came next.